that there is research, some of my research and others, that shows that exact relationship. So during periods of drought or falling rainfall, you tend to see more risk of conflict. So I forget what week it is, but it's 5 or 6 weeks from now. We'll get to exactly that issue. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, looking at it here, it looks that way. There has been some recent research looking at that correlation between rainfall and growth decade by decade, several decades back. And it is true that when you go back several decades, the relationship is sort of at its strongest, which again makes sense. To the extent that over time, sub-Saharan African economies are diversifying and they're not as dependent on agriculture, you would expect that relationship over time to get weaker, which is good. So it means that with development and with African economies less dependent on rainfall, they're going to be less subject to these kinds of shocks. Yes, I think that's right, yeah. There is a study, actually, there was just a job market candidate who came to Berkeley to give a talk in the econ department, and she looked historically. She doesn't look in like 80s, she looks like back centuries. So she looks over several centuries in China at climate variability of this kind, and well, she's actually looking not only at the economy, but also political instability. So it's a bit related to Lauren's point about sort of climate shocks and political instability. Her name is Rui Xue Jia, and she's in, I guess, Stockholm School of Economics. And so she finds that relationship. So she actually finds historically in China, you find that relationship. And there have been a lot of studies. I've been recently working on a survey article that's been trying to document relationships between climatic anomalies and various forms of political instability, violence, sort of social breakdown. And you actually see this over and over and over again throughout history and in more recent periods. In primarily or overwhelmingly agrarian societies dependent on agriculture, extreme climatic conditions can lead to violence and social breakdown. We'll come to it in a few weeks. It's going to be something we'll talk about for a couple lectures. Okay, so what I want to do now that we've sort of motivated this issue about variability and rainfall fluctuations and sort of economic volatility is think about how that affects agriculture. Let's come back to Bloom and Sachs. So imagine you're in a setting with lots of variability. Volatile rainfall is maybe the easiest way to think about it, but we can also think about it in terms of prices. So the point was raised before. What if global prices are really variable? That's going to affect farmers too, because even if I have good rainfall and I produce X kilos of corn or maize, I'm going to get a lot less income for them if the price is much lower, and I'll get more income if the price is higher. So that's another source of variability. Now imagine I'm choosing to farm choosing between two crops to farm, crop 1 and crop 2. The green line is crop 1, the red line is crop 2. What I've put here is the average yield for those two crops. The green line has a lower average yield than the red line. So looking at this sort of at baseline, I would say, well, I should definitely grow crop 2, the red crop. Right? I mean, I'm making like 50% more income on that crop. So imagine red is a cash crop, let's just say. That, and green is a kind of boring food crop, something like that. Okay. Now let's introduce some variability. Year to year, there's all this variability. This is the figure I was talking about before. Good rains and bad rains. And here, good rains and bad rains look kind of predictable, but in reality, of course, they're not. I showed you that plot before. Let's just imagine sometimes you have good years, sometimes you have bad years. What the red line is here is I got caught again on this. Sorry. I'm new to showbiz. The red line is the crop yield for the red crop, crop 2. In good years, the red crop does incredibly well. If the rains are good, you just make tons of money. But it turns out this red crop with a high average yield does terribly in drought years. So when there's bad rain, you lose your whole crop. Let's just imagine. It's very sort of soil moisture or precipitation sensitive, this crop. If things are good, you make a lot of money. If things aren't, you don't. On average, though, you do really well with crop 2. In contrast, imagine this boring food crop, green. Sure, you do better when the rains are good, but it's pretty drought resistant. So maybe this is a traditional variety of a certain crop. A lot of the traditional variety crops in sub-Saharan Africa are actually pretty drought resistant. So if you knew it was going to be a good rainfall year, which crop would you grow? Crop 2. If you knew it was going to be a bad rainfall year, which crop would you grow? But you don't know. That's the problem. So what do? Which crop do you grow? Maybe a little bit of each, but you might want to diversify your portfolio. So what are we going to do? Let's actually be very specific. Let's say crop 2 is corn or maize, and crop 1 is cassava. Cassava, does everybody know what cassava is? Cassava is called like manioc also. What's another term for cassava in English? I forget. What's that? Yucca, right. So yucca, manioc, cassava are all, it's a root crop. So it's a sort of fibrous root crop that's widely grown in sub-Saharan Africa. It's also grown in South America. And corn, which is called maize in sub-Saharan Africa, or called maize in Britain, is the red crop. Now, actually, neither of these crops is indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa. They're both New World crops. But they both spread very successfully in sub-Saharan Africa, and they're widely grown in many different parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And many of the varieties of maize that are grown actually look a bit like this, in that they're more rainfall sensitive than cassava. Some of the root crops do better in dry conditions. And it's also true of like sorghum and millet. Sorghum and millet are indigenous African crops. They've been around for thousands of years, and they tend to be relatively drought tolerant, and maize tends to be relatively drought sensitive. So there are crops that have profiles that look a bit like this. And again, we're back to the issue of which you should grow. And I want people to sort of answer, what are 3 or 4 of the key factors that would make you choose crop 1 or crop 2? What's going to determine this decision? Yeah?
Well, that little extra bit that drops, so we could have between cassava and corn maize, the difference between like child starting or your child going on the next year, you're definitely going to take that insurance. But on average, you're going to be taking less money, less income. But your more protection will be sure more people be God get sick or something could be more likely to happen.
That's great. So you've raised like 2 or 3 really good points. So let me go through them. You said insurance. You said growing the green crop is like insurance. It sort of limits the worst outcomes, but in the good outcomes, you don't do quite as well. So it's very much like insurance in some ways to grow one of these root crops that's better in drought conditions. You also mentioned sort of life or death. So where is subsistence here? Like, what is the minimum amount of food we need to survive? If that line, which you could think of as some minimal like caloric requirement to live, is somewhere between the red and the green line of the bad rainfall year, you're going to be pretty hesitant to grow the red crop. Because if things go wrong, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Okay, so that's a great point. Tara. That's right. If you're sufficiently risk averse, we know you're going to choose the green crop. And it's related to the point here, which is basically saying, those first few units of consumption, if they mean tons to you, but high levels of consumption in a good year just means so much less to you than those first few units of consumption in a bad year, which is basically what risk aversion is with the curvature of the utility function, then you're going to choose the green crop. So another way of stating your point is saying if you're sufficiently risk averse, you're going to choose the green crop. Of course, then you're foregoing all that extra income on average. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you can't cover it when you have a bad year, that would make the impact of having a bad year less than
So access to insurance is going to be critical. If there were sort of actuarially fair, well-priced insurance here, now it could be through a market, it could be through your social network, you would definitely grow the rent crop. If you knew that in bad years, you could always basically cash in your insurance policy and make sure your income didn't fall to a very low level. Now, there may be a distinction here between formal insurance, actually going to the market and buying an insurance policy, versus relying on your social network. In which circumstances would relying on your social network in a case like this seem less attractive than a formal policy? Yeah. Exactly. That's right. If your social network is very local, you could be in trouble. So there's social insurance or informal insurance that could work very well for what we would call idiosyncratic shocks. Like I get sick, but maybe no one else in the village gets sick. I just happen to get sick. My friends will insure me. They're having an okay year. They'll help my family out. If there's a drought year, that means everybody in the village basically is being, or almost everybody's being affected by this drought. They're not going to have any money either. So the insurance may not be there when you need it. Whereas a formal policy, which may sort of pool risks over a much larger area, could be a better bet in those years. Yeah. Okay, so there could be some upfront costs that you need to invest in the seed and the fertilizer and the know-how and the land preparation and different things to allow you to grow a crop. And there again, access to the financial sector will be important. In this case, not access to insurance, which is the good point raised before, but access to credit. So you may not be able to access these sort of good crops, even if you have insurance, if you don't have credit. So it becomes a complicated problem. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 So producer cooperatives are a way to get around this. So instead of just relying on my friends or whatnot, if I'm a producer, all of us producers can get in together and have a producer-run cooperative that helps us pool risk. So if in the eastern part of the country there's a drought, but not the western part of the country, in that year, effectively people in the western part of the country help the people in the eastern part of the country and vice versa. If we're each basically paying in some sort of dues for insurance, we can insure risk that way. So there's a bunch of different ways you could think about insurance. One would be big insurance companies, the way we think about it here. Another would be a cooperative. Others would be more informal, sort of social network based insurance. Yeah. Irrigation. Uh-huh. Yeah. There are irrigation investments. There have been a number of dam projects, and often when you have dam projects, it opens up the possibility of irrigation from the sort of captured water. So just like other forms of major infrastructure investment, whether it's telecommunications, roads, et cetera, there has been increasing investment, sort of investments, both hydropower and irrigation. So the picture is changing. That's the most recent data I've seen still shows just basically trivial shares of African farmers having access to irrigation relative to Asian farmers, where very high rates have access to irrigation. So there's just still this fundamental difference in access to irrigation. Okay, so you guys have basically made a lot of really good points, which is to say, why would you choose one crop or the other? Well, we don't know what you're going to choose unless we know what access to insurance you have, your degree of risk aversion. People didn't talk about saving much. If I'm able to make a lot of money in the good years with a red crop, I could self-insure basically. I could just have savings I'll draw down in the bad years. So I don't necessarily need an insurance policy if I have enough assets. So I save in the good years. When the bad years come, I still consume a decent amount. But irrigation could matter too, right? Because irrigation would mean the bad years won't be so bad. I'm still going to have enough water to have a decent crop. Yeah.
So I'm thinking about savings that I can bring up because when you don't know how to variability in the range and not, you're always saving.
Yeah.
You're always saving from that no extra savings.
Yeah.
You're kind of reducing your global crop and
Yeah. That's right.
That's directly not getting back as much as you would.
Exactly. So if you have to have a very sort of big buffer stock or very large amounts of precautionary savings, you're just not consuming as much as you could. You're not consuming that red dotted line because you don't know. Here it looks like good year, bad year, good year, bad year. But what if it's like Goldman Sachs said, and you have 2 or 3 drought years in a row? You need really large amounts of precautionary saving, and that's going to sort of reduce consumption even in the good years. Just a hand in the back. Yeah. Why don't you what? Do both. So you could do both. You could potentially do both. And then what you still hope is that, remember we were talking before about how much food you need for subsistence. If you did both, your outcome in a bad year would be sort of between the red and green lines here, and you just hope that the subsistence level is sort of, you meet the subsistence level. If you don't meet the subsistence level doing 50-50, you want to shift more towards the green crop. But of course, by doing both, your average production is going to be somewhere in between the red dash line and the green dash line, so you're not going to quite make it all the way to the red dash line. Yeah.
It's also really hard to say in a lot of these filters because if you have more money than your neighbor, you're expected to pay school fees for all of your family. Whatever money you have, you're expected to spend a lot of time right now.
So the point you're raising is interesting, and it relates to the social insurance we were talking about before, which is to say that social insurance is effective when people feel really compelled to help their neighbors and help their relatives. And we were framing that before as a very good thing, as saying, if I'm in a tight-knit social network, I have a bad year, my friends will help me. But the downside of that is that people who are doing well can't sort of accumulate and invest and maybe start businesses of their own. So there's a cost to insurance too for those who are maybe doing a bit better. So let me move on to get through 1 or 2 more points. Okay, other issues beyond rainfall that Bloom and Sachs get into. We've talked about rainfall variability. We've talked about why, in the absence of these other institutions and other policies, access to insurance, credit, all these other things, rainfall variability can be very damaging for living standards. What are other challenges facing agriculture in sub-Saharan Africa? Soil quality tends to actually be very low. If you look at nutrient content in most of tropical sub-Saharan Africa, it tends not to be very good relative to much of Asia. This is the Clayton Bloom and Sachs based on agronomic studies. There are exceptions though. Some of the highland regions in eastern Africa have actually very fertile volcanic soils and extremely high agricultural productivity. But of course, that's just a subset of sub-Saharan Africa. The downside too is some of these regions with very fertile soils are in hilly or in mountainous areas, quite a bit in the interior of Africa, not on the coast. So if you want to get production from those regions to the coast in these hilly interior regions, it's costly. So it would be much nicer in some sense if the coastal regions right near a great port were extremely fertile. It'd be that much easier to export production. And so just for sort of a rough sense, I put a red box around some of the highland regions of eastern Africa, stretching from Ethiopia down through Kenya, parts of Uganda, Tanzania. And so these regions tend to have more fertile soils and higher yields. And it's not a coincidence in some of the highland regions, say of Kenya, that are in this box, British imperialists wanted to set up large-scale commercial agricultural plantations and farms for export because they are very high yield, high productivity areas. Another advantage of those sort of highland, relatively high altitude regions, as we'll come to in a couple slides, is they tend to have a lower tropical disease burden. So it was actually possible for these white settlers to survive in those regions in a way they couldn't in areas where there was more tropical disease burden. So there was sort of a twofold explanation for it. So these highland areas, higher altitude areas with volcanic soils have good soils. They have lower temperatures on average, which means there's less evaporation of water, so soil moisture tends to be better, and that's going to contribute to better crop growth for certain crops. Okay. Another disadvantage of being in the tropics has to do with technology transfer. So one thing that hinders technology transfer of agricultural commodities is differences in climate and soil. It's sort of obvious. If there's a crop, let's say a particular type of corn or some other food crop or a commercial crop that European farmers or North American farmers have been selectively breeding for centuries. They've been figuring out sort of exactly under what conditions it grows best, et cetera. Say North American conditions or European conditions. Those crops exist. They're very high yield. They don't transfer easily to sub-Saharan Africa, which is hotter, drier, has different types of soil, et cetera. So a lot of this sort of accumulated knowledge about really a lot of the accumulated agricultural innovation has not been directly applicable to sub-Saharan Africa. Now that does not by any means mean there has not been tons of agricultural innovation in developing regions. There has been. There has been in sub-Saharan Africa, as I mentioned before. New crops have been incorporated. Crops from the Americas, crops from Asia, and there has been a lot of innovation. But the kind of stock of knowledge from the global north in terms of agriculture is just very difficult to transfer to sub-Saharan Africa. There's also a contrast with India in particular. India in the 60s and 70s experienced what's called the Green Revolution. It was actually the introduction of new hybrid seeds for a number of crops that were very high yield variety crops that were developed through extensive agronomic research. So one of the puzzles that's out there, one of the questions people ask is, why hasn't there been the equivalent Green Revolution for Africa? And there have been active efforts over the last decade or two to do that sort of R&D, the basic research and development that's needed to develop higher yield variety crops. And some of it is paying off. I mean, there's certainly been a lot of effort to develop better seeds, improve varieties. Some of these are available in the market, but still agricultural productivity lags behind. So let me leave it off there, and next time we're going to turn to health.